You've all been waiting for it, and I have been too. Yes, I finally got the much anticipated Moondrop May in for review. And you know, for a while now, Moondrop has been releasing some flops, honestly, and a lot of whatever releases, be it the peaky, sort of rough sounding Stellaris, or, you know, the really shouty Starfield 2 that really discouraged me from Moondrop, considering that the Starfield 1 was my gateway into the Moondrop as a brand in the first place. And you also have the beautiful world, which seems to just literally be a juiced up Kato, but a lot more expensive, and I've tried it. It really isn't good. Like, they made the Kato, the Moondrop IM that I love the most, into something just ugh. So yeah, Moondrop was on such a roll since like 2020 to early 2022. Then it seemed like they lost their magic touch. However, when I got to try the Moondrop May for the first time in the recent PotaFest 2023, I was really impressed. And I wanted one as soon as possible to get in for review, and finally here it is. So let's see how the Moondrop May fares, shall we? The box of the Moondrop May is well sized, as you can see, and as traditional with Moondrop, we get a nice big anime waifu art slapdash right in the front. Now this one looks very nice, as you can see, and it's got that, you know, clover, leaves, and flowers theme. Very cool. But again, I would have wanted it to be in color instead of black and white. It's like Moondrop ran out of color ink in their printers or something. Jeez, every release since, like, I don't know, the Chu 2, or actually the Stellaris, has been in black and white. I don't know what's the deal here. But yeah, on the back we've got some standard specifications and of course the frequency graph. Sliding out the cover, we've got a super fancy looking inner box that has a slightly reflective pattern of, you know, clovers and flowers. It really reminds me of the very fancy inner box of the Moondrop line. Doing a little X-ray peek inside, we see the Moondrop May themselves and foams inserts in the top, and we get the carrying case in the bottom of the box. The case itself is probably made of fake leather, and although I don't personally like the brown color, it's decently spacious and it feels pretty premium compared to the usual pouch case, so this is a win in my book. And inside that case contains our cable. And my oh my, what a cable it is. Now Moondrop, they aren't really known for bundling in good cables. Probably they're known for making really bad cables with their IEMs. But they've turned a 180 here, and this cable is probably, it has one of the most cool looking wires I've ever seen. Period. Like, it's silverish, but kind of more like space gray. The wires are nicely braided. It's got, you know, a chin slider, you know, has a matte sort of metal look to it. Again, really nice. And you've got a mic clump that has full volume up and down, as well as play pause controls, instead of just a one button mic that we've seen before. Speaking of the mic, here's a sample. The microphone of the May's DSP cable is pretty good, actually. It has a high recording gain, which does introduce some background noise, and whilst my voice lacks a bit of that low-end body, it does sound clear, if a little bit too sharpened. This would more than suffice for just basic calls and Zoom meetings, and you can probably use this for recording basic videos, and it wouldn't be half bad. And this cable terminates in USB-C. They've also included a USB-C jack on it. Again, really nice inclusion. Remember guys, wear protection for your jacks. That's because the May has DSP functions, which links up to the Moondrop Link app to allow for sound presets as well as parametric EQ capabilities. Now, I am told by Moondrop's CEO that the hardware used here is similar to a CDSP cable with some alterations, and its firmware is different from the CDSP. So of course, when you plug this in the Moondrop link, it'll show as Moondrop May. But yeah, we'll get to all that a bit later. Overall though, a really nice cable, and I'm actually trying to find someone who can sell me an Aria 2 cable, because that one, it uses the same wires as this, but it terminates into interchangeable plugs where you can use either 3.5 or 4.4 millimeters, which I would use for my other IEMs, because wow, this cable is really aesthetically pleasing in my eyes. What's left of this package is going to be located under the foam inserts of the Moondrop May themselves. So it's going to come in this little box here. You take that out, take out the envelope, and you get 3 sizes of the sort of generic Moondrop ear tips that you commonly get in Moondrop IEMs. Not the best, but not the worst either. And finally, you have a smattering of basically, you've got like this quality control, you've got the warranty card, you've got this information contact card, and the user manual, or more like a user pamphlet, which is printed in English and in Chinese. Overall, it's a pretty fully featured package with all you would need. A nice case, DSP cable, which is of course extra value, since you can swap it out into other IEMs to experiment in the future, although of course the tuning that the DSP does is specific for the May, but still you can use it for other IEMs. Now I could nitpick about this Velcro strip right here, which again is a downgrade. Don't think I didn't notice, Moondrop. This is just a strip, it's not a hook like before. Or I could say, you know, I wanted more ear tips, but honestly, I really feel like Moondrop maximized the unboxing and accessory experience for $65, and I feel more than satisfied with what is being given here. It's probably the most value-packed unboxing experience from Moondrop yet, aside from maybe the Chew, because that thing has, you know, the Moondrop spring ear tips. Now to the Moondrop May themselves, and it's a pretty looker of an IEM as well. You're getting a metal front plate with the same sort of clover and flower motif as the box. It's reflective due to having this sort of mirror finish kind of texture. And naturally, this makes it a fingerprint magnet. I've had to wipe it down quite a lot just to get this footage, but it does look quite impressive otherwise. And since it's a flat surface, I've known of some friends who have, you know, gotten a vinyl skin and stuck it up here, so you could try that out if you want. The side that faces your ear here, it's basically a frosted dark resin. As you can see, when you shine in the light, it sort of reveals a bit of the components inside. It's got a smoky look. So this is very reminiscent of the resin used on the Moondrop variations. So my main gripe with this shell is actually the nozzle. So as you can see, it's got a lip, which helps your tips not fall off. Cool, right? But it does not have any kind of stopping groove at the bottom. I'll show a little graphic I drew so you can sort of know what I'm talking about. So some ear tips, like with the AET-07 or like wider bore ear tips, they'll just slip in and slip in way too deep at 2 different angles on the earpieces themselves. So when you wear those ear tips, you may mistake your May as having like really bad channel imbalance, but it's actually just because the tip angles are misaligned. So be careful with that, and probably stick to ear tips that aren't too wide so that they don't go in too deep with the shell. But fitment wise, aside from the nozzle issue, I've had basically no problems wearing the May in my ears. It's light, it's ergonomic, and extended listening sessions I think will likely not be any problem. Well, since we are using the DSP cable, that's basically the source for the Moondrop May. But if you do use the Moondrop May with a normal 3.5mm output or a balanced connection, it will exhibit slight changes to its tonality as well. I would recommend a neutral, a brighter, or a sort of warm bright source to enhance the May's already warm sound with a bit of extra clarity. As far as output power goes, the May can work with weaker sources, but a little bit more juice wouldn't hurt either. And as for ear tips, it seems that narrow bore ear tips are the most suitable, with the stock Moondrop silicone tips already being pretty alright on the May, if a little hard to fit because the nozzle is kind of big compared to the opening for the ear tip. But right now though, I am using these medium-sized Tangentium TAPB bass tips. Though on the May, it doesn't really have a bass boosting effect. What it does do is that it has a softer silicone umbrella here, which is more comfortable on my ears. Let's get to how the Moondrop May sounds on its DSP cable. So the following sound descriptions will be made with the May via its DSP cable on the standard preset. Note that this is different from having the parametric EQ settings at the default, which is more akin to having the raw frequency output of the Moondrop May IEMs themselves. I will have a companion piece video that will explain the different nuances of the presets and along with covering the features and how the Moondrop Link app works. But for now, we will stick with the standard preset. In most of the different presets, the general feature of the Moondrop May is that it is probably the most fun sounding Moondrop IEM, with a warm, impactful sound accompanied with a very effective use of the microplanar driver to create what I would describe as sharp treble. So starting with the bass. The low end on the Moondrop May is very present. It has a nice slam. It creates solid hits of sub bass whilst also not skimping out on the mid bass. It seems that thanks to the planar driver handling the top end, the dynamic driver here is alleviated of some of its duties, and it's able to really focus on handling the bass here. I really like the impactfulness that the May's bass imparts on your music. And on songs like Azurus's Without You Beside Me, the bass shows that it can more than keep up with the speed of the raging bass lines, whilst nicely creating a constant rumble that is deliberate with bass detail that is also nicely shown. And this is on the standard preset, which means that the driver takes well to quite a bit of EQ too if you do want even more bass impact for that bass head experience, right? This is probably the best implementation of a dynamic driver bass that I've heard from Moondrop, and I vastly prefer it over the bass on the Blessing Free or even the Variations. I don't quite like the Variations, so it's definitely better than what the Variations has to offer even. So going to the mids, I was a bit afraid that the bass would be overly dominant and that it would overshadow the mid-range, but no. The May continues Moondrop's trademark VDSF mid-range, that all its fans clamor for, including me. The lower mid-range is nicely warmed up without being overbearing, and of course, you can modify it to your taste with the parametric EQ features. Upper mids here, they maintain that VDSF style peanut gain, right? It's having a slightly less drastic rise, so it allows for a nicely present vocal presentation without the shoutiness and the graininess. I guess a nitpick is that the mid-range in general, although it does not choke in busier tracks, actually it separates still quite nicely in busier tracks. But there seems to be a smoothing out of micro details in favor of the more major elements in music. But otherwise, if you've listened to Moondrop mid-range before, the May just continues to show Moondrop's tuning excellence here. The high end of the Moondrop May is another standout for this IEM. I previously dismissed the use of planar drivers due to the amount of uneven frequency peaks that they create, with not much in the way of actual tangible technical advantages. But the May has definitely changed that perception for me. The microplanar driver inside here really does improve the treble performance. Instead of going for a natural kind of clarity, a crystalline and sort of airy feel like with the Kato, what the treble in the May goes for is that it portrays sharpness in a really tasteful way that not only manages to avoid the common pitfalls of sibilance and edginess, but it also enhances the upper notes of the May with added treble detail. I'll be dying to see how Moondrop implements this into their future IMs, because the May's treble performance to my ears is a success. It's different from what the Kato does, but I like it nonetheless. The soundstage of the Moondrop May remains largely unchanged, whether through the DSP cable or 3.5mm outputs, with the bass being the most intimate and narrow component, so you'll have this effect where bass is kind of shallower, but with the mids and the high ranges sitting sort of average in terms of width. Height is somewhat present, but the imaging ability of the May is just okay for the price, and overall imaging, it's kind of meh. Now, I was initially worried that the May, without the DSP adjustments, would be very peaky and uneven. Like, you know, I thought that the DSP was basically a crutch that saved the planar driver from having uneven peakiness, but thankfully, my doubts were proven incorrect. The good things don't merely stop with the DSP cable here, as even if you use the May with a normal 3.5mm cable or a balanced connection, you still get a nicely tuned IM with enhanced technical ability thanks to being unchained from the limits of the DAC in the DSP cable. Now, don't get me wrong here. The DSP cable is plenty good enough to get you started and get you messing around the EQ presets. However, it had to trade dynamic range in order to drive the May at a higher volume, and it's kind of bottlenecking the May's resolution retrieval a little bit as well. So I've got the May plugged into the 3.5mm output of my iBasso DX160, and I like it even more. You'll immediately notice that volume is increased from using the standard preset, or any of the 5 presets actually, due to the nature of these presets being subtractive EQs. Also aided by the fact that, of course, the source I'm using is more powerful. Now, bass doesn't seem to have changed much from the standard preset. However, you'll notice a slightly increased upper mid-range presence. Just enough to add that little bit of extra emotion to your music. And the treble here, though, it seems to vary. On some songs, it seems that the sharpness is slightly reduced, whereas on some others, it would seem to be more present. Either way, it does not become a messy roller coaster of a frequency graph, but it continues to perform its duties in adding treble detail and presenting a tasteful sharpness. So as you pair your May with a better source, it doesn't have to be like a DAP adapt like me, right? It could just be a semi-decent dongle. I think you'll hear a slightly improved dynamic range, where smaller sounds are kept small and they have a larger variance in terms of volume with the large sounds, and along with some small improvements to separation and detail retrieval of the Moondrop May IMs. If you find a stock output of the Moondrop May on its DSP cable to be a little bit lacking, switching to 3.5mm and using your own source is definitely a viable alternative, and in my experience, it doesn't take away from the May but makes it shine even more. Phew. There's still a lot to talk about the Moondrop May actually, but the runtime of this vid is getting long, huh? So here's what I'll do.
There's a bunch of things to talk about the May's DSP presets, how it works within the Moondrop Link application. So, like I said before, I'm going to have a companion piece to this video covering that aspect coming in a few days. And I'm sure that everyone is dying to know how the May compares to similar to your IEMs and even a few stuff that's kind of beyond that. Well, I'm trying to source other IEMs to demo, so stay tuned for a comparison video of the Moondrop May against some other IEMs as well. For a while, Moondrop seemed to have lost their magic touch with releases such as the polarizing Stellaris or the shouty successor in the form of the Starfield 2. But they have finally stuck the landing once more. The Moondrop May, it presents a fun, punchy sound along with VDSF style mid-range, which is always a welcome addition, and meaningful use of a microplanar driver to create a tasteful rendition of treble detail that makes for a delightful listening experience. Coupled with a good unboxing experience, accessories, and a DSP cable, all for $65 no less, there's little to complain about the May on the value front. Whilst the usage experience of said DSP functions in the Moondrop Link app remains unrefined, the May does not rely on its DSP necessarily and can possibly perform even better when used with a normal 3.5mm output. Safe to say, with the Moondrop May, Moondrop have regained their edge. And for an end-of-year release, I really think they just casually dropped one banger of an IEM. Well done, Moondrop. As promised, this is the companion piece to the main Moondrop May review. This video will basically cover the DSP features of the Moondrop May using the Moondrop Link app. With that, let's get them out of the way. Let's begin. Okay, so to access the May's DSP, you're going to need the Moondrop Link app, which sadly, the newest version cannot be found on Google Play Store. You're gonna have to go to their website for that. And the newest version, as of this recording, is currently 2.0.0. So, when you fire it up, the app is first of all gonna ask for access to the Moondrop May USB. Click OK on that. It's gonna ask you for the language. Of course, I'll be using English. There's a privacy policy, which I skip over because I think most of you will as well. So now it's gonna ask you for, quite frankly, way more permissions than I'm willing to give for an app like this. But sure, I'll let it use everything it needs. Oh, it also asks you for Bluetooth, despite the fact that we don't have any Bluetooth thing. This is kind of a thing with sort of all of these like audio management apps. If you use like the Galaxy wearable suite, it'll also ask for your Bluetooth. So yeah, I guess you'll have to allow it for this one. Turn on the Bluetooth. There you go. After all that setup, you're gonna be into the device selection screen. So if you have Neko Cakes, Space Travels, the Sparks, the Little White, the Alice, it'll also show up here. Also, there's like a top banner here with like promotion pictures of their products, which, okay, cool. So click on that box. It asks you for more stuff, you know, very worrying. It asks for access to photos and media on your device, but I guess we're implying file access, so sure, okay. There you go. Now you're into the May, and you'll be greeted with a selection of 5 presets, which we'll get to in a bit. That's the preset EQ. To the left here, you'll get your parametric equalizer, which allows for changing 9 bands of frequencies with the gain ranging from +3 decibels to -12 decibels. And you cannot enter decimal values for the gain, sadly. It'll just remove the decimal value. But with the Q curve, You can enter decimal values and it'll range from 0.2 to 10. So if you leave all the PEQ settings at their default, this is actually not the default. This is like some other PEQ preset here, but by default, it should be at like 0 decibels everything, and the Q should be at 1 for everything. So if you leave it all at the default, it basically gives you the raw output of the May through the DAC of the DSP cable, of course, which is similar to basically plugging the May in with a 3.5 millimeter output. With the limited boosting you can do, only 3 decibels, but you get minus 12 decibels of negative gain. I think Moondrop is probably trying to steer you forward to, learning to do subtractive EQ instead of additive EQ, which is a good thing, but I feel like this is a technical limitation of the DSP in the May and the free DSP itself. But it could be considered a good thing, I guess, because when you do subtractive EQ, it alleviates on clipping. Still though, I wish the UI for the parametric EQ was more graphic. What I mean is that if you've seen the parametric EQ UI of the Audio Technica Connect app, it gives a better visualization of your Q curve and gain levels in a much more user-friendly way. Whereas here with the Moondrop Link app, you get 9 bands of EQ adjustment, which is good, but basically you're just entering in values of frequency, gain, and Q, and it doesn't give you a visualization of how much boosting or subtracting you're doing, which is something that the Audio Technica Connect app is doing a lot better, despite the fact that it's much more limited in terms of EQ than the Moondrop May DSP. Unless you really know what you're doing, or you're really keen on messing around with the different variables, trying to get that sound you want, dial it in, I actually recommend you don't touch the parametric EQ and take a look at the 5 main presets we have here. So with the 5 main presets, let's take a look at these. So first of all, we have standard, also titled here a normal equalizer. It's basically the default adjustments made to the Moondrop May from the DSP cable, which, might I add, is different from the raw 3.5 millimeter tuning of the Moondrop May IEMs themselves. So if you want to hear more details on how this standard preset sounds like, this is the default preset that I use to review the sound of the Moondrop May in part 1 of our review. So go check that out if you want a very clear picture of what that works like. Going to the next preset, which is bass head, I really like that they included this little Easter egg like anti-Herbert. For context, Herbert is the CEO of Moondrop and he doesn't really like bass. Anti-Herbert it is. So, okay, I quite like that. This preset seems to emphasize both the sub and the mid bass compared to the standard preset. Since it's made with subtractive EQ though, there is no clipping. However, you can still hear a bit of bass bleed. Probably of the 5 presets, it'll introduce the most bass bleed into your Moondrop May. Next one is reference, also called the VDSF target. So as it says, it conforms to the VDSF style of tuning. It cuts down on the bass quantity. It switches the emphasization from sort of a more fun V-shaped thing to a more bass light, upper mid-range and vocal focus set. Next up is no bass, or also very Herbert. It has a further bass reduction effect from the reference preset from what I hear, and in this case it does make the Moondrop May sound reminiscent of a Moondrop Kato, but with a different way of portraying the treble. To know what differences it makes, again, go to the main review for that. But even with the bass reduction, I have to note that the May driver itself still has a very good oomph. So even with this lowered bass level, I think it's actually quite nice. And then finally, we have Harman style, which basically conforms to the Harman target The boost in the bass here is a bit different from the bass head preset because it's going for a more sub-bass focused boost along with a slightly steeper pinna gain, so we have a increased upper mid presence. This does come at the cost of some slight graininess and shoutiness, but again, it's to your taste, right? So all 5 presets are subtle enough to not be like this completely sweeping change that will completely change how you feel about the Moondrop May, but it is noticeable enough to make a difference in your listening experience. So if you like the May as it is, these presets may get it a bit closer to your taste, but it's not gonna turn the May into something else completely. Unlike previous EQ preset attempts like in the Sparks or the Neko Cake, I actually do find myself shuffling around with the different presets quite a lot, as all 5, they all have a little something to offer you. Sometimes the Harmon preset actually sounds pretty lively, and I was actually quite surprised because usually I'm not really into Harmon tunings, but the preset that is applied to the May actually works quite well. Then in other times, I would actually listen to something with female vocals, right? So I would bounce between the reference preset or the no bass presets, which of course tie closer to the sort of VDSF tuning that, you know, is reminiscent from the Aria, the Aria Snow Edition, the Kato, Starfield, all that. I've even let my friend Nakomi tested it out, and he also quite liked the Harmon preset. So again, there's a little bit of something for everyone here. If you trust Moondrop enough, you can go to this button here called PEQ ... They couldn't even make the text scroll, so they just did ... I don't know. But yes, you can go into this button. You'll have a login prompt, which will allow you to enter in your credentials. You'll make a Moondrop account essentially. Login succeeded. And now you can go to the download section and you'll eventually get all of these user created presets along with another set of Moondrop official presets to essentially emulate the May into other IEMs. So you have a choice of turning your May into the Beautiful World, the Solace 2, the Dark Saber, the Illumination, and the Blessing Free. So if you choose to believe it, you can turn the Moondrop May into Moondrop's other flagships. How cool is that? Well, the thing is, in practice, these presets are really bad. It just kills the treble of the May. And that's essentially all it does. It's almost like Moondrop is bad-mouthing their own flagships, or for some reason, I don't know. But the user-created presets in the feature tab here is a bit better. Some of them are definitely, though, quite ambitious with what they want to do. So we have a preset here which says May to para with Venus earpads. So it's trying to emulate a headphone with different earpads on an IEM. So definitely quite ambitious with what they want to achieve. But a lot of these presets are actually quite good. And of course you can just download them. Let's say, I don't know, like just randomly one thing here. There you go. And you can just apply configuration and it automatically, oh yeah, you have to reapply for the USB thing. But yes, it'll just automatically apply into your PEQ preset. Now that you press this PEQ button after you've logged in, it'll also allow you to submit your own parametric equalizer preset. I haven't tried this because, again, I'm not really much into doing these PEQ thingies, but you can also do that. However, my overall experience with the Moondrop Link app is far from perfect though. In the context of using it with the Moondrop May DSP, I've experienced many times where the allow USB access prompt, it would just not show up after messing around with the presets, and it won't apply the changes, which would then require a restart or wiping of the cache of the app to fix it. Choosing between the 5 presets and the loaded PEQ settings, sometimes the changes happen on the fly, but other times you have to reconfirm the allow USB access prompt, and this behavior is often quite inconsistent and buggy, to say the least. And of course, the app is asking for a lot of permissions, and it does require you to turn on Bluetooth on the initial device scan session when I don't need to pair any Bluetooth device, because again, we're just using the May here. There's also gonna be this constant Moondrop Link notification stub on your notification bar to keep it running, which other apps of this type do not need, and it seems to be consuming a lot of your phone's battery too. Look, I get that the permissions thing on other apps, like even the Samsung Galaxy wearable app, they require that, right? But you know, no beef with Moondrop here, but they're not exactly this established company, right? So when the app is asking for a lot of these permissions, I think all of us would, at the very least, have some doubts as to how your data is handled. Even if I don't think the Moondrop Link app is doing anything malicious, but it's kind of a security weak link here, so I just have to make mention of it here. The Moondrop Link app, in the context of using the Moondrop May, it has a lot of potential. It allows you to play with a lot of variables that were previously inaccessible or non-existent, and I really like that the preset EQs are actually quite useful this time around. And of course, it serves as an ever-expanding hub of Moondrop's catalog of products. So, you know, if you have their TrueWAS products, this is also where you're going to be using it with. However, even with a 2.0 release that touches upon a lot of the faults of its predecessor, the Moondrop Link app still has many stability issues and bugs that needs to be addressed, along with, you know, a valid privacy concern about the sheer amount of permissions it is asking, even if this is the industry standard for other applications of this type. Alright, that's kind of it for the Moondrop May DSP and how it works. If you have any more questions, I'll be happy to answer in the comments. Alright, part 3 of the Moondrop May review is here. We looked at the May itself, we looked at its DSP cable, how it works and how it interacts with the Moondrop Link app. Now, let's see if the May stacks up to other competitors who are also vying for your $65. Let's begin. First, although I do not personally own the Truthear Hexa, nor the other IEMs that are mentioned in these comparisons, thankfully my local stores do have them in stock along with audition models, and I got the chance to audition the IEMs pretty thoroughly. So I'll use images provided by Lumi, a friend of the channel, for the Hexas whenever I can, and I'll use my personal images that I was able to capture when possible. With that out of the way, let's first consider the build of the Hexa versus the May. Honestly, they're very similar. Both have the same type of matte, smoky, semi-transparent resin combined with a metal front plate. However, the front plate of the May is a mirror finish with its clover patterns, whilst the Hexa opts for a more stealthy matte black metal front plate. Now the Hexa, it has a more edgy kind of shape, whilst the May's shell is more curvy, kind of like an ergonomic design thing. And I will note that the nozzle of the Truthear Hexa is a bit bigger than the May's. It's almost to the size of the Blessing 2 or the S8's nozzle. The cable on the Moondrop May, barring the difference of course of the built-in DSP chip, it feels a lot more premium than the Hexa's cable, which is just a normal kind of black braided cable that's kind of thin looking. not really my thing. Now on to the sound. Bass on the Hexa is a little less emphasized than on the May. The driver, it just doesn't punch with as much force as the Moondrop May here. Lower mids are equally warm, although the May's, it may be a bit thicker sounding. Upper mid-range on the Truthear Hexa are slightly less intense than with the Moondrop May, but both are trading blows in terms of the level of refinement on presentation here. Now with treble, the Hexa seems better extended, although on rare occasions it does become slightly grainy, whilst the Moondrop May has the edge in terms of the detail and the sharpness, even if it has a slight treble drop off afterwards. Technicalities, again, roughly similar on both. The Hexa's soundstage width is slightly wider. I'm not saying that to say that it's necessarily better, but you're getting different widths of soundstage, and that the Hexa's is slightly wider than the May. Micro detail is better on the Truthear Hexa, but the May has the advantage in terms of macro detail separation. I'm pretty impressed with the Moondrop May that it can play ball with a Truthear Hexa using just one dynamic driver and a micro planar, whereas the Hexa is a quad driver combination of one dynamic driver and 3 balanced armatures. Now note that the Hexa recently enjoyed a price reduction to $65. I think it's on SeeAudio, but it may be reflected in other markets as well. So basically it's equal to the price of the May, in which case it makes a compelling alternative to the Moondrop May. If you want something with a bit less bass and a bit more detailing. However, the May does strike back here with the different treble rendition and the value add of the DSP cable. So really, again, it's quite up to your taste for this comparison. Now let's compare the Moondrop May to another Moondrop. We have the recent Aria 2, which sports a better build, being a substantially thicker metal shell, right? However, there are worries about paint chipping and bubbling because of previous releases Moondrop made, and they've always had a bit of a bad rep about this. Actually, fun fact, I was hunting for an Aria 2 deal for the comparison purposes in this video and maybe a separate review of its own, but the deal fell through because I couldn't ask for a discount despite the owner of this Aria 2. Its Aria unit has severe chipping going on. Let me show you a picture. It's not pretty. There's that to worry about. The Aria 2's shell is, though, it's slightly more comfortable for my ear due to the lack of sort of a, if you can see this part, it's sort of like a hook portion that latches onto my and your conchas. With this hook, it gives the May shell more isolation capabilities. The cables are equally nice between the May and Aria 2 because they're essentially the same thing, but it's your choice between, of course, having the USB-C DSP plug, or do you want the interchangeable 3.5mm and 4.4mm connectors. The sound between the May and the Aria 2, well, first of all, bass on the Moondrop May is markedly more impactful. Even when you put it on the no bass preset of the DSP, it still has more bass quantity compared to the Aria 2. And of course, there's a bit of a bigger sub-bass bump with the May. Aria 2's has some lower mids that are comparatively more neutral than the May, but the upper mids of the Aria 2 are tonally brighter than with the Moondrop May. Even when you set the Moondrop May to the reference preset, the upper mid range of the Aria 2 is going to be generally more present. Now, because of that, the Aria 2, it has a more sparkly and a bright vocal performance at the cost of sounding a bit shouty and overly compressed in some songs, whilst the Moondrop May, it's a little bit more reserved. and it plays better in general use cases. Treble on the Moondrop May is again sharper, it's more well defined than the Aria 2's. It's got a bit more detail too. Aria 2's has a slightly wider soundstage width and better soundstage height. Overall, it results in a better imaging capability than compared to the Moondrop May. But it's not like a big amount or anything here, right? It's an improvement for sure. Micro details are roughly similar, but I feel that the Moondrop May, again, it separates macro detail like even better than the Aria 2, especially in the busier mixes where the Aria 2 becomes quite compressed and sort of congealed into a block. Again, this is possibly due to the tuning because I've seen this phenomenon happen on the Starfield 2 and the Moondrop Beautiful World before, so the Aria 2 being a slight patch of those two IMs, I can see why it again has this negative trait. Overall, legitimately, I will buy the Moondrop May over the Aria 2, and if you want it to sound even closer to the Aria 2, you can always use the DSP cable and set it to a reference target. However, I would really like to have that Moondrop Aria 2 stock cable, it's really nice. And our third comparison, so we know that the Moondrop May uses a one dynamic driver and microplanar setup. Do you know another IM that uses a similar setup? Yeah, it's the SeeAudio Rinko. So let's pit them against one another. On the unboxing side, the SeeAudio Rinko really spins into the weeaboo indulgence aspect with a little clear card with art on it and the standee of the Rinko mascot, which looks very fan servicey. But I like it though. SeeAudio is clearly willing to be a lot more risque than Moondrop. Hey, it's something, and if you're going full weeb, that's a good aspect. Now, the case on the SeeAudio Rinko is also quite nice. It's a sort of hard case with like I think it's like a clever wrapping thing over it. It's better than the case on the Moondrop May, in my opinion. Although, because it is white, it will probably get dirty after a while. The build of both IMs are again similar. You have the same smoky dark resin and the metal front plate, although on the Rinko that metal feels a bit more plastic than the Hexa even. No competition on the cables though. The May cable is leagues better than the Rinko's cable. Just no competition here. Now on to the sound. My original suspicions were that the Moondrop May would sound similar to the SeeAudio Rinko without the DSP corrections. Thank the Lords I was wrong. Now out of the 3.5mm output, the Rinko has a lot more bass, both in terms of sub bass and mid bass compared to the Moondrop May. But it's like this really bloated and way overblown bass presentation compared to the May, which has a good thick texture and it has great impact, but it doesn't go overboard, you know? Lower mids on the SeeAudio Rinko are warm, but again, it's way too much, even for someone like me who does like a bit of warmth. Upper mids on the SeeAudio Rinko, it's pretty bright. It's a bit sharp, but it feels like it's fighting for space with the bass. Treble on the Rinko, it seems to also roll off quite earlier than the Moondrop May, and it just does not have the same amount of sharpness and detail that the May is able to produce. Technical ability is just no contest. Whatever separation abilities the SeeAudio Rinko has is basically saddled down by the overly boosted tuning. Macro details, they fight each other, let alone micro details. Dynamic range, soundstage, and imaging on the Rinko is also nothing to write home about. The Moondrop May wins hands down. Now, I think the SeeAudio Rinko is a good lesson about too much of a good thing can be a bad thing. Do I like a natural warmth in my music? Yeah, but the Rinko, it just goes way too far in this direction, and it ends up with an unhealthy, an unnatural amount of boosted warmth, a bloated bass, and rolled off treble. Its overall sound I can only describe as being blunt. Now just for fun, I also tried plugging the SeeAudio Rinko into the May's DSP cable, and using the reference and no bass presets, I turned the bass down on the Rinko into something a little bit more manageable, but it seems that overall detail retrieval and separation still seems better on the Moondrop May. And the Rinko, it just doesn't have that sharp and well-defined treble of the Moondrop May. Now, although the Rinko and the Moondrop May share the same driver configuration, it seems that the components that Moondrop are using are contributing to technical ability changes and improvements. So it's not just the DSP tuning that's helping the Moondrop May, it's the driver setup itself. So again, I think you know who the winner is in this comparison. It's the Moondrop May, hands down. So at the end of the day, the May does quite well against its peers, and it presents a unique value proposition in offering built-in DSP capabilities to further personalize your sound. At $65, it is a very justified purchase. It's not only able to surpass other products within its own brand, but it also favorably compares with competitors' offerings. So for me, I mean, what else more can you ask, right? That's about it for the Moondrop May. We've covered quite a lot about it, so hopefully this will better inform your purchase decisions. Thank you for watching, and this is Lumerion signing off.